Welcome. My name is Jo. I'm one of the directors here with Ten2Two. For anyone joining who doesn't know, Ten2Two, we are a specialist part-time and flexible working recruitment consultancy. We've been around for coming up to 18 years now, pioneers in the part-time work space, and still going strong and supporting businesses and individuals in being able to bring part-time working patterns alive, really. We have the pleasure of working with lots of different candidates who have experienced lots of different things in their life that leads them to need part-time or flexible working. And this evening's webinar is really honing in on one of the biggest issues that we hear from people, and that is gaps in CVs, whether that be a gap to raise a family. I'm treading on Tracy's toes with the content. Whatever the gap is. We've heard it all before. So what we wanted to do was put together some content to really address that area of having gaps on your CVs, and talk you guys through it and answer any questions that you might have. So we do have a presentation. The presentation will probably last around half an hour or so. And then at the end, we should have time for Q&A. I know that this topic gets lots of questions coming through, so we will try and answer as many questions as we can. I will be in the background while my colleague Tracy is presenting, tapping away, trying to come back to you if I can live. If we get to the end and we've run out of time, then we will do everything that we can to come back to everybody, either on an individual basis or in a general kind of FAQ tomorrow or the day after. You do not need to write copious notes. There will be a copy of this sent out to you. Although you feel free to write notes if you want, that's fine. The questions need to be popped into the Q&A box. We don't have a live chat, and that's just so that everybody can concentrate on the content rather than reading everybody else's comments. And if you enjoy it, please do leave us a review at the end. I will probably say this again at the end, so don't be upset if I nag you a little bit. But our Facebook and Google profiles are easily found, and we would love to hear your feedback. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague and fellow director, Tracy, who's going to take you through the content for this evening. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you very much, Jo. A lovely introduction as ever. So we've got some good stuff to talk to you about tonight. And without further ado, let's get on to the agenda. So obviously it's about gaps in your career, gaps on your CV. So what, we're going to cover what, why does it matter? Who looks, who cares? Why do we need to worry about them in particular? How do we go about fixing the gaps? There are some very straightforward ways of addressing this, which we will cover in the slides. We'll give you some examples. And career breaks are often a common gap on the CV. So maternity work or career breaks are often a common gap on a CV. But we're also at the end just going to spend a little bit of time, just a slide on returning to work after that break, because that comes with it. It's hand in hand. We are possibly, there's some of you on the call tonight who might be in that gap now and wondering how to address it, write it. So that returning to, just some tips there as well. And then we'll follow up with some Q&As. So all quite straightforward. So what? Research and experience tells us that there are 5 top things that recruiters or hiring managers notice on your CV. So your recent work experience is one, top of the list. Job hopping is another thing they notice. And number 3 on the list, out of the top 5, is gaps on your CV. And the other 2 are the brand names you might have worked for and list of skills. So as you will be aware, and if you've attended other events that we've done, we keep talking about your CV is your sales tool. It's your selling document. So its purpose is not to get you the job, it's to get you an interview. It absolutely is to get you in that first stage. So you want the recruiter or hiring manager to read your CV and immediately put you on their yes pile. So unexplained gaps on a CV, they present questions and possibly concerns. So therefore, a recruiter or hiring manager may not immediately put you on the yes pile. They might actually put you on a maybe. And then there might be a few more yeses that they go to straight away and forget the maybes. So you just don't want any uncertainty to cross their mind by having a gap. So just to give you an example, you know, sometimes at a shortlist stage, say an employer has got 2 really strong candidates for their job, both have the skills and experience they're looking for, but say one has got some unexplained gaps on their CV, which one is going to be the most obvious? You know, the one who is really clearly explained is going to be the most obvious person. So gaps, oops, sorry, I've zipped through there. Gaps sow a seed of doubt, which you don't want. So just a little bit of interaction here. So it's pop into the chat. What sort of gaps either have you had or do you think there are? I'm really interested because I think this is a good demonstration of something which we'll talk about in a minute, but be keen to see in the chat if anybody can put some examples of what sort of gaps you think there are. Why have you had a gap, or do you know of anybody who's had a gap, and for what reasons?
If you pop that into the Q&A box. Thank you.
Just a few coming in.
Some good ones.
Yeah,
some good
yeah,
ones. COVID, very topical.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, should we read a few out? Yeah.
Caring responsibilities, long-term illness,
Yeah.
caring for relatives, stay-at-home mum, traveling, lucky sausage, raising a family, having children. So
yeah,
I'm not sure whether people can see these Q&As or not. I'm never quite sure. But
bereavement,
hopefully you've picked up from what we're saying that there are all different sorts of reasons, and they are life.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is why I wanted to do this exercise. I think it's important because, you know, your gaps are things that happen to us in day-to-day life. They are redundancies, relocations, bereavement, illness, children, families, caring commitments. So it's life, it's normal. And I think I want to put this in here because it's human. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with explaining gaps and what's going on in someone's life. So
some of these are brilliant, by the way. Some of these are making me very jealous. Trailing spouse abroad. I'd love my husband to get a job abroad. That would be awesome. Sorry, carry on, Tracy.
So here are some of the reasons. We've just talked about them, but here are some other reasons. And some of these are interesting as well. I'm not sure anybody mentioned this one. So errors. So actually typing a date incorrectly on your CV leading from one job to the next could create a gap. So check, and double check. That's such a simple thing that can be fixed. The next one, shortening your CV. So if you've got a particularly long period of employment, say you've been working for 20 or 30 years and your sort of CV is going on to 3 or 4 pages, we always tell you to shrink it down to 2 or so. And by doing so, you might take off certain roles, you might take off older roles, but there therefore may be a gap between education and the bottom job on your CV. So yes, keep your CV short, you know, ideally around 2 or 3 pages, but don't necessarily miss off employment or education. Even if it was a number of years ago, you can summarize those roles into one section or that education into a section. And I'll give you an example shortly on how to do that. Excluding irrelevant roles. So this may be where you're going for a slightly different job in a different sector, or you're going for a more junior job when you've been more senior, and you take stuff out because you don't necessarily want that to be seen because it might harm your application. Don't take stuff out. It's better to leave it in, but maybe don't weight it up as much as some of the other stuff. And that's where your personal profile and cover letter and things like that will become more important to explain why you're going for that kind of role. So career breaks, lots of reasons for career breaks. Obviously raising a family or other caring responsibilities for elderly parents or someone with an illness in the family. Put the dates in and a one-liner as to why you have taken the career break. If the career break is relevant to the role you're applying for, add a bit more detail. If you've done some stuff in that time, add a bit more detail. And again, I'll show you an example shortly. Illness, it's life. Illness happens, and it's better that you put in that you've had a gap and you've had illness, but put it in. It's still important. You don't have to go into loads of detail on your CV. Remember, the purpose is to get in front of them. And there's an opportunity when you're face to face to have a conversation and explain what's happened in your life, if you feel comfortable about that. Unemployment and redundancy, again, this is so common. You know, 20 years ago, maybe it wasn't as common. Nowadays, and particularly because of the pandemic, it's so common as well. Be honest, again, just be honest that you have been looking for work. You were sadly made redundant, you've been looking for work. And you could also put stuff in there and list what you've been doing in the time that you were off. If you have managed to do a bit of upskilling, you know, a bit of a refresher course on Excel or Word, put it in there. Or a bit of voluntary work if you had some time, put it in there as well. So you'll just see below, there's a little box there that summarises maybe older sections of work. If you don't want to make your CV really long and you don't want to take it off, put it like that. So it's a big chunk there, 10 years, April 1996 to June 2006. During this time, I held customer service and admin roles for whoever. Just summarise it, because it's so long ago now and it probably isn't as relevant as the more recent stuff. So, how to explain a break in your career. I think this is really self-explanatory. It's quite straightforward, but just look at the raising a family option. You could simply say, there's the dates and then a career break to raise a family. And you put it chronologically in the right place on the CV where it happens. Or you could add more information. So you could also say, during this time, I also used my project management and communication skills to complete a house extension. Or during this time, I also used my finance skills as treasurer of the school PTA. If you're unemployed, you know, straightforward career break due to unemployment. You could put a little bit more flavour in there and explaining what you tried to do about it. So due to the pandemic, it took a little longer to find the right role for me. During this time, I decided to change my career and undertook an accountancy course to help me secure my next role. While spending time finding my next role, I updated my Excel skills and provided bookkeeping support to a local business on a voluntary basis. It might only have been a little while during your redundancy time or your employed time, but it's something to add in there. Another example, maternity leave. Maternity leave, it is what it is. It says what it is on the tin. So, you know, put that in the right place on the CV so there are no gaps. Illness, you could simply put career break due to an extended period of illness. Straightforward. So those are a lot of the issues around, those are a lot of the points around how to write it on the CV. Jo, I don't know if there's any questions at this point before I go on to the sort of, right, you've got to have the gap, this is how we write it, now getting yourself ready to go back. Were there any other particular questions about what it looks like, where it sits?
No questions that I have noticed so far. There is a lot of chat though, so my apologies if I've missed it, and we will get to you. I just have to say that some of you in the chat are brilliant, and there are so many different reasons for having a break. And the one thing that I just wanted to interject with was, whatever your reason is, it is your reason. You shouldn't feel like it needs to be justified.
No.
You own that reason. You obviously took, sorry.
Well, you first, Jo, sorry.
You took the break because it was needed or it was part of your journey. I hate that word, sorry. But own it. You know, write that sentence. Be confident in explaining what the gap was. Don't feel like you need to justify it to people. You're just informing them.
Yeah. And it's not a right or wrong answer. It's as I said, as we said before, it's life. And you'd hope that the people who are interviewing you have had life as well, you know, that they've been through, they understand life in most cases.
Sorry, just before you carry on, one more question has just come through, which is interesting, is how long of a gap requires an explanation?
Yeah, I think pretty much any gap, really. I mean, if you left a job in May, had a holiday, did a bit of tidying the house and started in July in your next job, I think you're so close there, you know, May, June is the only month. But I think that really is I would almost, I don't really want to say put that in because that's the month. That is going from one job to another and you took a break in the middle to have a holiday. So I think otherwise anything really is a gap, even a 3-month gap, a 6-month gap, a 1-year gap, I would still put it in. And it might be that you were looking for work, you know, that can happen. It can, if you get made redundant, it can take months. It might be 3 months, it might be a year. So I think it should be put in. Yeah. So we often talk to people, and there might be people on the call tonight as well who are currently on that break. So if that's the case, we just thought it would be helpful to touch on the getting ready to return quickly with this slide. So there are a few important steps to consider before returning to work that will just help that transition, make that transition easier, if I could speak. So be clear about your career objectives. So for example, did you work for a multinational company before, but you're now hoping to work for a smaller business? Were you full-time, but you're now looking for part-time? What did you enjoy most about your past jobs? You know, consider options that you want to look at and go into. Talk to family and friends, research what it is you're looking for. It helps you become focused on your return. So you really are going for the right thing that's going to make you happy. You know, will you need more? Think about the practical things in your life. Will you need more support around the house? You know, will it affect the family dynamic, etc.? So think about your objective of going to work and just some of the implications of that. Boost your confidence. So professional self-confidence usually takes a knock during a career break, and it doesn't need to be a long career break either. Particularly, I was off for I think 18 months and I was really knocked when I went back. So it doesn't need to be a long break. And remember that confidence comes from doing, not thinking. So if there's any way of looking for practical opportunities to regain your professional self, think about volunteering, for example, for a local charity, you know, or helping at local events for a charity, for example, just to give you that confidence, that professional confidence back again. Revise your technical skills. Yes, things may have moved on whilst you're away. They may not. So just find a way to start using the latest versions of, say, MS Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. The systems you used in your work may have changed or been updated. So ask your local contacts or former friends or colleagues who might be able to give you some pointers. Professional qualifications. So get yourself back up to speed on your old industry or learn about a new one by completing professional courses if you can, attending conferences or seminars, sign up to relevant newsletters, chat to ex-colleagues to talk shop a little bit. And if you've got any industry memberships that have lapsed, then re-register if you can. And it could be a worthwhile investment because it signals your commitment to getting back into your role after a break. Check your sector knowledge, either through online research or via a professional body. Get up to speed on the latest developments and trends in your sector. Amend your CV. So it's likely that your CV will need a bit of a tweak or update, either the format, the content. So if you've been volunteering or working for local organisations, put that on your CV, as many employers do respond positively to active people, even if you haven't been formally employed. And update anything like if your old employers have changed names or anything like that. Refresh your contacts through your network. So networking isn't necessarily about approaching people and asking for a job. Networking is about making contact with people and is a part of life. You do it at the school gates. You do it in your local communities all the time. So use LinkedIn if you can to reconnect with some of your old work colleagues and contacts. And a large percentage of jobs actually are found, a percentage of jobs are found through word of mouth, referrals, personal contacts. So re-establishing contact is a good idea. And I'm sure ex-colleagues wouldn't mind, and probably in many cases would welcome, a message from an old colleague saying, "Hi, how are you? Long time no speak." It's a good way of getting back up to speed in your industry, and get help from recruiters. So if you're thinking about working locally, talk to your local friends and contacts who they might be employers themselves, or could put you in contact with good local companies, and register with organisations. So we specialise in helping returners, but register with organisations that maybe align with your values as well. So let's just summarise some of those points so far. So you want to set yourself up for success. So don't disadvantage yourself by leaving gaps on that CV. You know, you want to give yourself every opportunity to be at the top of that shortlist pile. And honesty is the best policy. Check your CV thoroughly. Check again, and get someone else to read it for errors as well. If you're returning to work after a career break, make the transition easier. Dedicate a bit of quality time to think about your return to work. Consider what you really want to do and get yourself in the best place to achieve it. And then seek help and support, you know, from recruiters like us, former colleagues, friends, family, and hopefully you're with all of that, you're hopefully in a good place to get back. And I think that's it. So there's probably going to be a range of questions based on different types now of breaks. Jo, is that fair to say?
Yes, sorry, I'm knee-deep in that Q&A at the moment, having lots of lovely conversations. We've had a lot of questions through. Thank you, everybody. We're going to pick on some of them that are relatively generic, and hopefully they'll answer lots of you. There's a few people who've come forward with very personal situations, and we will try and come back to those in as much detail as we can, probably on a direct basis if possible, if you've registered with your email address. Otherwise, we will do a Q&A document in the coming. But while we're here, I think you touched on this, but somebody has asked, is it better to add your career break chronologically in your CV, or to have a specific section specifically for career break?
I would definitely say have it in a chronological order, because the hiring manager or recruiter won't necessarily go to the section to read what that career break is. So definitely have it all in a chronological order. It shows the flow of your career and the flow of your life effectively.
Okay, thank you. Does the fact that you have raised a family raised a family explicitly on your CV open you up to discrimination? Which is worse, not explaining the gap or stating you have parenting responsibilities? This has been asked many different ways.
Yeah, so from experience, we feel that the risk that an unexplained gap brings to your application is greater than the risk of your application being discriminated against due to you having taken time away from work to raise a family. I'd also suggest that if an employer were to discriminate against you in this way, would you really want to work for them?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know that that is quite a difficult message when you are job hunting, especially if, you know, it's quite urgent that you secure work. We understand that not everybody's in the privileged enough position to be picky about who they work for. But the sense that we get from clients who we work with is that if they are minded to discriminate because of something that they see on a CV, then they're going to find other reasons to discriminate against people as well. So getting that interview, as we said, which is the purpose of your CVs, to secure that interview, needs there to be no gaps, ideally. And the interview process is for you as well. So in that interview process, you can explore the personalities and the culture of the business that you are presented with, and you can make an informed decision as to whether they're an employer that you would like to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to get that interview. That's
Are there any other questions?
Yes. Lots of people have combined freelancing within their gaps. So they might have done a number of short-term contracts, or they might have worked on a number of projects under a freelancing umbrella. So first of all, would that be considered gap?
As a freelancer, no. So any period where you are gainfully engaged in work, whether that be freelance, temporary, permanently employed, is not considered a gap. If you choose to operate as a freelancer, and you've done it because you want to work reduced hours or flexible hours, you know, it's almost irrelevant what hours you do. You've chosen to work in that way, and it just gave you the flexibility. But you don't need to identify this as a gap in your career at all. It's working. You've just chosen to be structured and remunerated in a slightly different way. That's all it is. So you're working. So no gap.
The question also then goes on to ask about how to present that on your CV, because obviously if you list every single project, it can become quite cumbersome. So having a top line header of engaged as a freelancer across various projects, or however you want to articulate, that also gives you the opportunity to cherry pick the types of projects that you've worked on to highlight, and we haven't talked about it so much in here because it's slightly off topic, but tailoring your CV for your applications is incredibly important to make sure that your CV is specifically appropriate for the job that you're applying for. And freelancers sometimes find that quite difficult because they've worked on so many projects and they want to talk about all of their projects, rightly so, they're very proud of them, but being able to cherry pick the ones that are specifically relevant for application, if you bundle them all under one heading, it gives you that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of other really poignant questions that have come through in a range of different words. If you've had a long career gap, so 14, 16, you know, a number of years, can you include and expand on roles that you did more than 10 years ago?
Yes, I would. If you've had a lengthy career break, you know, your CV should focus on the skills you've gained whilst working that were most valuable. And it's also great if you can do something in the workplace to get something current on your CV as well, though. But perhaps volunteering or offering your services to a local business or a friend for free. But certainly, absolutely expand on the roles that were really relevant, even if they were the 16 years ago.
Excellent. And another slightly contentious one, I guess. Lots of people have been on career breaks because of ill health, and are concerned about disclosing that on a CV because of employers possibly looking at that in a negative light in case of recurrence or inability to fulfill the role for one reason or another. What are your thoughts on that?
So I mean, many people have reasons for breaks in their career, and illness is actually quite common, I see. You should still put it as a gap. I wouldn't suggest you go into detail on your CV about it necessarily, unless you want to, but a straightforward due to illness. If you've had a job after that, you know, you're clearly back in the workplace. So you've got the evidence there that you have had an illness, you're back in the workplace. If this is your first role back and you're currently off because of illness, you know, perhaps you can just include in there about demonstrating you're ready to get back to work, you know, keen and ready and enthusiastic to get back to work. And as with all the other gaps, if there's anything you have done whilst you've been off, you might not have been able to, but even if there's any small things you've done, like volunteered or supported someone in another way, you can add that in as well. It still adds more flavour to you know, to your CV.
We've seen all sorts of creative wording, haven't we, about the skills gained through a career gap. We won't go into but some people turn it into a real conversation starter and you know, elaborate. There's a really good question here that is something that I haven't considered before, actually, so it might cause a bit of discussion. Applicant tracking systems, how are these to be overcome? I'm assuming that question is in relation to gaps on your CV. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tracy?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the applicant tracking system is asking you to put in, what information. I mean, if it's simply a scan of your CV, then do exactly as we've talked about. You know, if they're simply asking for, it depends what they allow you to put in and how prescriptive they are. Because if they literally ask for employment blocks by dates, and that's what you're putting in, and there may be gaps between them that normally you'd explain on a CV, but you haven't got anywhere to put it into the system, then you know, if there is an option to add, if there's a free form box to add additional information, absolutely put it in there. If you can get hold of someone, I know it can be hard, add some kind of cover note in there if you can upload something. So yeah, I think it just depends on the system, and it doesn't always help you with your lovely chronological order. It's finding a way of making sure that information gets to them somehow. Do you think, Jo?
I think so, and I think, you know, it's been a long time since I've applied for a role, so I feel a little bit out of touch. Sorry, candidates. You might want to be really tricky and make tricky to the system, that is, and plug those gaps by putting the dates in and putting your explanation for the career gap as your job title. You know, if the system is very, very restrictive and not allowing you to explain those gaps, and you are concerned that the gaps will trigger an automatic response, then you could play it at its own game. I think Tracy's way is a little bit more genuine and professional, probably.
I don't know. I think yours makes sense as well. Yeah, absolutely. All the ATS is all a little bit different, you know, they're all slightly different, so it really depends what it's like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think Tracy's comment on doing what you can to try and reach a human is really not only will it give you an opportunity to state your case and explain any gaps, but it will also leave an impression on them. So when we talk to people about job hunting more generally, we do talk about following up, being quite targeted, doing what you can to speak to somebody within the business, because then your name is going to be already on the tips of their tongues when they go through the CV pile, which is a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we've got a couple more minutes left. I'm just scouring through to find some of the questions, so forgive me. As I said, you lot are very chatty. It's great.
Very busy Q&A box.
Very busy. So I think that we've covered this. However, I'm going to ask again, just in case people are late. How do you write up a gap if you were made redundant but then job hunting?
So you were made redundant and you're job hunting in that time, is that right? Absolutely.
The gap was spent job hunting.
Say that again, sorry, Jo. A
gap was spent job hunting.
Yeah, say that, absolutely. You were unfortunately made redundant, but you spent the time looking for your next perfect match, or, you know, and taking your time to find the right role for you. Absolutely.
It might.
Go on, sorry.
It may also be a conversation starter in the interview process about what it is that makes the right role for you, which opens up a whole opportunity to explain why the role that you're applying for is the right role for you. We layer in some flattery to that particular employer, because employers love that.
Yeah.
You'll have to forgive me. I'm normally much faster than this through the chat, but there's a lot of it.
There's a lot in here. Yeah. Somebody's asking about education and graduation dates. Yeah, so again, it comes down to dates. Are these necessary, or do you open yourself up to, you know, ageism for childcare and career gaps? So it's the same as anything on your CV. You know, you can't hide who you are. You are who you are. And if you don't put if you don't put your education dates, you don't have to. As long as your chronological career, you know, your career is all chronological up to down to the bottom, you don't have to put your education dates on. And put your education on, definitely include it, so your highest level of education that you achieved, but you don't have to put the dates on. And it is, again, that conversation we've already had with, if there is a client or employer that's discriminating on that, do you want to work with them? And I know we've said nobody has a choice, but
we've had another couple of questions on a similar vein about the length of your career. So taking it right the way back to when you first started working, does that open you up to ageism or other areas of discrimination? we see a lot of candidates come through who actually cut off, Tracy alluded to this earlier, so lumping together your early career under one heading, or some who actually cut off roles that are very, very far back in their career and just concentrate on their more recent. It's a matter of choice. I've had some clients come back and say, well, how can their first job have been at such a senior level? So they haven't understood necessarily that there has been some of that early career withdrawn from the CV, and that itself has led to question marks. So I personally think Tracy's suggestion of grouping together early experience under one generalised banner, and then listing in more detail the more recent and relevant roles. And even if those roles aren't so recent because of your career gap, it's the relevance of them that's really key and important, to make sure that those skills that the employer is looking for are noted on your CV.
And what you could do is, instead of saying from 1996 to 2006 you did customer service, you could just say prior to 2006 I worked in, so you're saying before 2006, you're just saying before that time I worked in this kind of role. But then the meaty stuff starts, that's when you get the more senior roles and more sort of to date. We've got time for one more, Jo, do you reckon?
We've got time for one more, which is an interesting one. What sectors are hiring right now, and what sectors would consider people who've had a career break? So I know where to focus my job search. I think that's a really interesting question. Lots of sectors are hiring at the moment. We are multidisciplinary and multi-sector, and we see businesses from sorts of sectors proactively hiring at present. I wouldn't say there is a sector that considers people with a career break any more favourably than another sector. Again, I think it's understanding the why of your career break. So as we've alluded to in the whole conversation, there is nothing wrong with a career break, and employers aren't saying that there is anything wrong with a career break. What they find problematic is when they don't understand the career break. There is just an unexplained gap, because that raises question marks, and it's human nature for you to jump to the wrong conclusion or to make assumptions as to what that gap might have been for. So I don't know if we can answer that question. Obviously, it depends what sector you want to work in and what your prior experience is within. But I think as long as those career gaps are explained, and as we said earlier, you really kind of own them and you're not kind of being apologetic for them, you are just explaining them, then any sector should be open to it.
The only thing I'd say there, and it goes back to the slide where we talked about getting yourself ready to go back to work, is if you're going into a highly technical, quickly advancing sector, it might be tech. I mean, my husband was IT, and gosh, that moved so quickly. If you were off for a few years, you needed to know the latest software infrastructure, servers, I don't know. But, if you were off, it goes back to the slide where we talk about getting yourself back up to speed professionally, talking to colleagues, researching the industry, making sure you understand what might have changed. So the only point there is it might be hard to get back in if you've had, say, a 15-year break, and it's and I mean really technically advanced, not like an office admin job or a marketing job, not really, you're talking about highly technical roles. Might be the only one where you sort of want to give it some thought how to get up to speed.
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm very aware that we haven't responded to everybody's questions, but we are now out of time, unfortunately. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening and for giving us some of your time. We really do appreciate everybody coming to spend the evening with us. Thank you, Tracy, for your useful and information-filled presentation. Oh, all the emojis are going now. This is my second favourite part of the evening. The counter, then the emoji.
I'm waiting for someone to do something really random. It's hearts and waves and stuff like that at the moment. Someone should just... Oh, there's a laugh. Thank you.
Everyone's going to be scrolling through trying to find the most random emoji now.
I'm waiting for the poo emoji.
Just to reiterate, a copy of tonight's presentation will be sent out in the coming days, along with a Q&A document. For anyone who's come to us with something very specifically personal, we will try and come back to you individually. If for any reason we don't, our contact details are on the screen now, and you should feel very free to get in contact with us. We are here to help. You know, we've both been there and done it ourselves. We've both had career gaps, so we know how daunting and difficult it can be, and most of the team have actually.
Yeah.
If you have the time to leave us a lovely review, that would be very much appreciated, but not expected. And enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, enjoy everybody. Thank you very much for attending. Hope it was helpful. Good night. Thank you.